Hi, I'm Gayla Austin, and I'm talking today about law and ethics. And we have a constitution in our country, and it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to create a more perfect union." And this is a copy of the Constitution behind me on the wall. And I put it up there because it seems to me that as a nation, we're not quite sure what it looks like sometimes and what it says. And these are the first words of the Constitution of the United States, and that is our governing document, we the people. That is the governing body, who makes the rules. And yet it seems like that many people that live here seem not to be familiar with it or know why it was written or what it says, and some are, I think, being purposefully disregarding it. And I'm Gayla Austin. I'm a lawyer and a graduate of Willamette University College of Law. And I'm writing this video about why I petitioned to terminate my membership in a state bar association. That is a regulatory association that governs lawyers. And you may have heard this being talked about in the national news if you've been watching any of that, in terms of, for example, let's break it down. We heard about the Florida bar addressing or failing to address a complaint against Pam Bondi, their state bar association, on a complaint of over 70 lawyers and judges and justices, decided not to investigate that. And then over in New York, you have that New York Bar Association did decide to investigate, say, William Barr or and other lawyers with regard to the mayor in New York City. And the information that I'm providing you about state bar associations in this video and the upcoming videos, this is information from my own case, and so there is no breach of confidentiality. It's not legal advice. I'm independent, and there's no paywall or sponsor to what I am saying. Why am I doing this? This is my way of standing up for the law in our democracy and exposing crime and corruption in a self-regulating profession. And again, why would I petition to be out of it? Well, because I was being charges were being made against me for no reason. And I think the thing that gets left out of the discourse here is that if you're going to investigate someone, there has to be a reason. You don't just decide, oh, I'm going to investigate. Let's investigate. Let's investigate. No, that is not sufficient to just because you don't like someone or because they are a political enemy or because you don't like what they say or who they're affiliated with. And that is what is going on too often now in our area of law and self-regulation. So just let's think about this for a moment. You have a group of people, whether it is, I don't know what, pick someone, soccer players, bake-off contestants, lawyers, and they're going to regulate themselves. Well, as human beings, what do you think might happen about that? And especially in the environment we have now, unfortunately, too often, this is politically determined. You have the people over here that don't like the people over here. And so what are they going to do? Cause problems for them by investigating them for no reason or filing charges against them for no reason. But our rules, and when we say rules and we're talking about rules in the national discourse, and hopefully this video is for you, whether you're a lawyer, you have a lawyer, or you're watching what's going on nationally. Yes, we have rules of law, and that's cases and statutes and codes. But something that is not being, I think, broken down quite enough are the ethics rules, what you are supposed to do ethically, how you're supposed to conduct yourself, in other words. And does that mean that you can just go investigate another member for no reason because you don't like them? No, it doesn't mean that. And yet, that is happening. And I think that example is playing out, like I said, right now. But it also happened with me. And to answer the question in the title of the video, why did I decide to petition to terminate my membership? Because charges kept being filed against me and against me and against me for no reason. And I would have to defend that, of course. And I'm going to show that in these videos. I'm going to show the requirements. What are the requirements? What are the reasons to investigate someone, to look into what they are doing professionally? For, like I said, for your own self as a lawyer, or if you have a lawyer, or what is going on nationally. What is the reason? And in our system, there is a code of ethics. And it's almost like the lawyers, judges, people involved in the legal field, almost, it seems to me, that when they left the law school, the doors of the law school, they just left that behind, because what I noticed really not being talked about are these ethics rules. How are you supposed to be, like I said, having a reason for investigating someone? What is required for an investigative report? I mean, where are the reports of what happened when you did investigate this person? The facts, in other words, instead of just trying to somehow smear their reputation, which unfortunately, especially in this profession, what's really important is your reputation. Are you truthful or not? And so, saying that you're going to investigate someone automatically, then you start to wonder, and I did before all of this too, years ago. I've worked in a law office my entire life. Wonder, well, what's going on here? I mean, and we tend to think, well, there's not smoke without fire, right? And so what is going on with this? But unfortunately, in the environment that we have now, it's a very high statistic of almost 37% of the time with prosecutors, there is not a reason to be investigating them, to be charging them, to be finding that they did a crime. That's pretty high, a third. And most of the time, lawyers, prosecutors are doing the right thing. And I don't want to make it seem like they are not. But the statistics are high enough. And especially what is going on now in our environment, this is turned, unfortunately, into a political issue too much of the time. And so what we're seeing is that our executive branch isn't functioning as it should. Our Congress is not functioning as it should. So far, what has been helping us stay in the democracy and in the rule of law is the courts and what they are deciding. And of course, who makes up those courts? Lawyers and judges. And as a lawyer, I get asked, why isn't our Supreme Court following the rule of law? Well, that's a really good question, because it's almost like they can just do what they feel like, or that there's some kind of vibe of this is what I think ought to happen. But that's just not the case. No pun intended, because besides the rule of the actual cases, there are these ethics rules that I'm talking about. Do you have a reason? Do you have reasonable suspicion? Do you have probable cause? Do you have facts that set out what happened and the evidence and the elements of that? You can't just go around charging people with things. That happened when we had kings. They would just say, I think you stole my sheep, and so I'm going to take you and put you in the Tower of London now because I don't like you and I think you stole my sheep. Well, you have to show that it's not because I just don't like you, is that, you in fact stole my sheep. Okay? And we have that going on. And so all of these folks, whether they're lawyers, judges, the Supreme Court, what is the answer to the question, why isn't our MAGA Supreme Court or MAGA lawyers following the ethics rule? Well, that's a good question, because they are sworn to a code of ethics to uphold the Constitution and the other rules. And too much of the time, they're just not being followed. So let's talk about it. And what is the reason? That has to be in writing. It has to be in writing. And while, yes, every state has its own code, there is a main code. And that code is, the model rules of professional conduct. Every single state has this. And so then the argument is, well, every state is different. You know what? It's not that different. These rules about, being honest to the court, having a reason, having suspicion, having probable cause, these model rules of professional responsibility, they were created by the American Bar Association, and they are the national code for attorney ethics. And attorney, what does that mean? Well, if you're a judge, are you a lawyer? Yes. If you're in Wyoming Supreme Court or prosecutor or judge or Supreme Court judge, you are subject to rules. You cannot just say, that doesn't apply to me. And so there's some differences, but those model rules cover this wide range of topics. And, they're fairly strict, as they should be, because, if you've ever worked around a lawyer, had one or be one, this is very important things that lawyers are dealing with. And so the rules need to be fairly narrowly constricted for safety, and they're not. And so you might ask, well, how is it that one state can decide to investigate or discipline a lawyer? New York is, but Florida isn't. And that's a really good question. And therein lies the problem of a self-regulating profession, because you may well have a reason in New York. New York found that there was one, corruption by the mayor, and they articulated that. And yet in Florida, with 70 justices saying there are all of these reasons why we need to investigate Pine Bondi, they said, no, we're not going to do that. And you can see we cannot go around operating with two sets of rules. And so in giving information to you, what then can you do about it? It's one of those things where the more that it is exposed, the more that people are talking about it, the more that you can complain or do something about it. Knowledge is power about this. And how does this work? In other words, well, they're not following the rules. And so you can see that self-regulation is inherently weak in enforcement, and it's vulnerable to abuse. And unfortunately, they've divided themselves into the red states and the blue states. And that means that lawyers should not be charged with anything, and lawyers that should be investigated or not. And I want to give some statistics from a collaboration between the Northern California Innocence Project and the Santa Clara University School of Law. They published a report entitled Preventable Error on Prosecutorial Misconduct. And the report talks about, I'm looking over here at my notes on it, there were violation of the obligation to disclose favorable evidence. That's another thing. It's like, well, what's the favorable part of it? I mean, you're going around trying to determine whether somebody did something or not, but that's called exculpatory evidence, and you're required to divulge that too, and that just isn't being done. It's just these whiffs of, here, this person did something wrong. In my state, Wyoming, possibly the most red MAGA state there is, the state bar prosecutor doesn't show, I'm not the only one, adequate predication. What does that mean? A reason to be looking at this scenario. They don't do that. In other words, it's not because a client complained maybe, or somebody else complained about it. They just decide to look at what you are doing without an adequate predication. And that is not also written down. And so what that looks like, we, in this arena especially, we live in a world of documents. And I think that's part of the problem, because we're used to being able to look at screens and look at something on a video, and it's short and it provides it, and we don't read, and they are relying on that, because then we don't really see what happened. Well, what happened here exactly? Well, it's in the documentation, but do you ever see that? Do you and I ever see that? No, we really don't ever see what went on behind. And so, like in my case, where's the investigative report? There isn't one. They just decided to charge me. And that's like, if you are driving down the road and you are going the speed limit, and it's probably happened to you, right? And this cop pulls you over and says you were speeding. And you say, no, I wasn't. Yeah, you are. Here's a ticket. Wait a minute. So, you have to go through the hearing and and you go to court, and the municipal judge says, yeah, the person wasn't speeding. You have to be able to prove that. But you shouldn't have been stopped in the first place. And all that does to your time, your money, your reputation, all of that it's purposefully, and it's bad faith. And so that's just the beginning of what they're required to show. The probable cause thing, I'm going to that requirement. We've been talking about it a lot with respect to the immigrants and people who are in this country that were not born here. We've been talking about due process. Well, that involves due process here too, and accusing people of things, and that's not being followed either. And I'm going to give some examples of that. And because I kept getting stopped over and over and over again for nothing, and my insurance just went through the roof because of that, is the analogy. I just petitioned and said, I'm not going to be a member of this bar because you just keep charging me for nothing and putting me in jail for nothing. So I don't want to be part of this anymore because of the corruption. And I'm going to show that. So it's one thing to say that, but what's important is to show the documents of that and the emails, the court orders, all of that. And so I will be putting those inside this recording. And bear with me, I'm just getting started on providing this information on a video, and I will be making these documents available and hopefully, refining my presentation and the rules and the information that is available to you about this so that you can see here's what lawyers are supposed to be doing. And then when they're regulating themselves, and are they doing that? And if they're not, well, then what can be done about it? And so here's my petition. I read it. I, Gayla K. Austin, submit this petition to withdraw from the Wyoming State Bar. The petitioner is not willing to continue membership in the Wyoming State Bar, effective April 7th, 2025. The attached injunction is pending filing in the Laramie County District Court. Why? Because they weren't going to let me out. They wanted to just keep charging me. It does kind of remind me a little bit of the Abrego Garcia case that's going on right now. They just want to keep charging him no matter. And that's why I decided to speak up about this. That's the main reason I decided to start putting out, to do my part somehow of showing what our rules say. We don't live in a tyranny. We specifically said via this document right up here, we don't want to do that. We don't operate like that. It's due process, meaning you have to have a reason to stop me. You have to have a reason to charge me. You have to have a reason to throw me in jail. It just is required. And so then here's also the order that membership. I got one from the Wyoming Supreme Court. Membership is terminated. That's the Supreme Court finds good cause. Yeah, there is no cause. And we're going to address that too. Yeah, they need to cover themselves, so they say good cause. There is no cause. And so I gave up my very profitable practice, and I walked away from that because I just continued to be harangued and hassled by a state bar prosecutor. And I'm not the only one. This is a pattern, and that's what I'm doing, is exposing it. It's my part of showing how we maintain our rule of law. And I'll finish with this. I'm hoping that this will expose and get state bar associations back on track of what they should be doing in a self-regulating profession, and showing the American public and other lawyers what is happening so that we can maintain justice for all, because we do not live in a monarchy with tyranny via a king. See you in the next video.